I'm Scott. Thank you for that kind introduction, Laura. I'm happy to be here as a part of ISQOLS. I've been with ISQOLS for 4 years or so now, and but being a part of the group has really helped my thought processes around happiness and community work and community indicators and well-being and all these things shift in a big way. But I've also made great friendships and connections through the group. So it's an honor to be here and present and to give back in some way. Today I'm not going to talk forever. I want to just do a short little thing, and I want to talk about the Sustainability and Happiness Research Lab, which we call the Happy Lab here at ASU, and that's Arizona State University. I'm a professor in the School of Sustainability, and so set up that lab looking at relationships between sustainability and happiness. And we do more work than that now, but that's kind of how it started. And then Sustainable Neighborhoods for Happiness is something that I had taken during my PhD and worked with. And now it's become Happy Hoods, and we work in communities all around the world, particularly focused on local areas around the university. And we work on the Navajo Reservation, thinking about how we promote opportunities, simultaneously how do we promote opportunities for happiness and sustainability. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means as we go. So this is kind of our mission for the lab and for Happy Hoods. By integrating happiness, science, and research, we seek to promote multiple pathways toward a happy, healthy, and sustainable world. With open hearts and open minds, we empower communities to create loving relationships within themselves, with each other, the earth, and all life. And thinking about open hearts and open minds is creating this aspect of humility, where we're able to meet folks that we work with in relationship, and we're able to see ourselves in them. And be empaths, and if you're working on community development, it's a good place to meet people, because then you can see what needs come from the community, and then where your biases come from as you work with community and things like that. And then love is the sense of not the way that we've kind of corrupted this idea with sexuality and physicality and these things, but love is connection with seeing myself in one another, seeing myself in the plants or other beings or the designs that we create in our communities, being able to connect with everything that we see. So just a brief bit about the Happy Lab. I just kind of want to give a little scan of some of the student projects that are happening in the Happy Lab. And so we have 7 PhD students, and we have 2 master's students, and then we have a whole host of undergraduate students that do all kinds of work with us, and we're all different flavors and things that I'll share. The idea behind the Happy Lab is we combine knowledge, methods, and practice from many fields of research to co-develop strategies and interventions for a move toward a sustainable and happy future. So not only are we drawing on happiness, science, and research, we're also drawing on my engineering background, and we have artists, and we have folks that are super deeply immersed in food systems research, and we have folks that are community developers, and we have folks that are social scientists and natural scientists and these types of things. And so we bring all those perspectives in and think about how we promote this move toward the sustainable and happy future that we talk about. And so the lab members pursue research in a variety of themes and topics, and I'm just going to give a few examples of that. I can let you read this while we chat, but Mary is essentially she's interested in conservation and thinking about how conservation of natural spaces is important for our happiness and our well-being, and is also important from a sustainability perspective. And then also, how do we get people out into those spaces to actually experience what they are, so that it's not just the thing that's far from us that we're not connecting with, right? And then thinking about how, as we all know, there's tons and tons of studies that show that natural spaces are important for our well-being and our happiness. How do you bring that information in and use that as a tool to help promote greater conservation or thinking differently about the way that we use our land? And then Tanvi is an undergraduate student, and she's really thinking about supply chain management and well-being and quality of life and these things. And her project is starting to shift into working with business and thinking about what are the tangible benefits beyond just the environmental benefits that humans can experience as a part of recycling. How do we get a greater sense of purpose? How do we feel more connected to the system? How do we have a higher sense of happiness or well-being as we move through these things? And then Leah is a PhD student working on regenerative development. Regenerative development is a relatively new concept, thinking about how we manifest the potential of living systems, observing natural systems, observing things from ecological sciences and these types of things, and how do you manifest the potential of a system to be just full of abundance and vitality in a way that gives us food and water and biodiversity, but it's also good for all the other parts of the system as well. And so it's a very new kind of concept, and it's an interesting concept, and I'm learning a lot as she's working through it too. And she's focusing in Hawaii using indigenous knowledge and practices and the way that they think about happiness and well-being, and the way that they think about the sense of community well-being is a big part of it there. And how do we tie that into this knowledge into the processes that we use to work through community development. And so all of this that we're doing, our work is mainly around community development as a process. And there's different flavors and different framings on it, but that's really what we're after. Using happiness from pleasure up to, eudaimonia or bliss or purpose or a meaningful life. How do we kind of move along that trajectory as we're working towards sustainability? And then Erica, she was focusing on inner sustainability. She just recently shifted to spirituality. So she's very, very interested in the connection between spirituality and happiness. What is the spiritual pathway in life? And then how is happiness a part of that? And how do you move toward a space of, love or reciprocity or these types of things that exist? Self-transcendence, which is a part of our work, or self-actualization. These are the things that she's exploring as a PhD student. And then Brian is one of the foodies that we have in the group. He's very much focused on food and using food as a tool to promote well-being and health and happiness, but also giving people this sense of happiness in cultivating their own food and connecting with the food and the food around communities around food, and using food as a tool to both make us happier and think more deeply about sustainability in our relationship with the planet. And then Sarah is this wonderful person from Egypt who has a lot of experience working on the ground in Egypt and has been through these amazing transformational experiences. And she's very interested in slow food and changing our relationship with food and capturing artisanal knowledge and using that as a tool to promote well-being and quality of life and happiness, and also to demonstrate these beautiful stories to the world of these. Here she was working with a group of women. She's very focused on female empowerment and bringing this type of knowledge to the surface, and creating a space for everyone to have an equal say in all of it. And so we definitely believe strongly that sustainable communities are equitable, collaborative, and loving, and that all humans deserve the opportunity for happiness, right? And that's from the very basic aspects of our very basic needs being met, right? Starting with that, with water and dignified housing and food and access to community, but it also ranges all the way up to everyone having the ability to walk these paths toward a higher sense of self-transcendence or meaning or purpose or whatever it is that we're seeking. And it's interesting because when we work in international communities, like Guatemala or some of the things in Bolivia or Mexico, you see that there's a strong sense of community, and there's a lot of people who are walking these different pathways toward happiness, but there's a lack of access to dignified housing or water or food. And then there's also this tension of folks wanting the developed idea of what it is to be happy with cell phones and cars and stick-built houses and that type of stuff. And then you work in community, and we work in community in the US, and you start to see that people they want less technology. They want a different relationship with their house. They want natural buildings. They want community gardens. They want to build community. They want things the way they used to be. And so there's these different tensions in each space that we work with us, and the students are all a part of that in some way, and then we're all focusing together to move toward this. And so the way that we do this is with this thing we call Happy Hoods. And the way Sustainable Neighborhoods for Happiness started was I'm an engineer by training, and so it started as very much an engineered approach where we would consider these different systems that are designed, food, water, energy, transportation, and we would say, okay, how can these systems be designed? This is what I was thinking, is how could these systems be designed to maximize opportunities for happiness, so that folks could find happiness in the systems and they could also be sustainable at the same time. And the ways that they could find happiness are through sense of, a connection with their community, interactions with nature, developing different relationships with the resources that they're using, or just the sheer joy of, coming together and building a structure, or having your own garden, or seeing animals that come into your landscape as you work through them. These are the ideas that we're thinking about. And so Happy Hoods is really about promoting sustainable and regenerative development. And we're really focusing on addressing food insecurity and also dignified housing. And we aim to enhance social cohesion in communities, all that contribute to the overall well-being and happiness of inhabitants of a place. And so food becomes a big part of our work. Water becomes a big part of our work. Housing becomes a big part of our work. And then from these little projects that we do, things start to go outward to the community, where the community needs representation from with the city, or they want to start different organizations within their group, or they want to have a community space. And so these kind of all our projects that we do all seed that type of stuff. So this is just one example of a project we did. A resident wanted to build a meditation space. And so we talked about what ways we could build a meditation space and go through this. And so we built this wood structure to serve as a pergola. And we're installing passion fruit and jasmine. And these are things that she grew as a kid in the Philippines. And so she gets that sense of connection to the food through that. And she's been sharing a lot of her food and offering cooking classes and stuff in the community because of that. And it's also a space where she can sit and meditate each morning. And you can see the straw bales there around. We actually did a natural building over that. We put clay and cob and things like that over it. And we're in the process of finishing it up and plastering it now. And essentially this is going to be a little retreat center for her to go and to meditate and and we all know the benefits of meditation for happiness and well-being. And it's also a space where she can grow food for herself and for her community and share that with her community. And it's also a space where she gets a retreat with shade from the space. And it's also a place where she's been welcoming folks in from the community to check it out. So it's building a sense of community there too. And we've done all kinds of other projects where, we'll go and we'll remove wood from one resident's place and we'll take it and we'll process it into wood chips for another spot, or we'll share that with someone in the community that wants firewood. We built garden beds there in the middle, as you see. That's something we do quite a bit. And the way that this works is I have students in the lab, we have students in the lab, and then we also teach a class called Happy Hoods. And every semester we have 20 or 30 students that will take the class. We'll teach them all the principles of well-being and happiness, and they'll read lots of literature. They'll do the same with community development and all the different tools that exist and theories and processes. We'll share our process, and then students get to go out into the community and put this stuff to work. They get to put the theory into practice. And then we'll come back and we'll kind of reassess the theory and think about what we experience and how these things go forward. And so we're constantly evolving our process and the way that we work with communities and work in communities, how we develop projects, who gets to say in that, how do we build a collaborative process of doing that, and then how do projects emerge, and then how do we find resources to build these projects or to do these projects and complete them. And so it in itself is an evolving process as well. This is just one picture of the garden beds that this amazing woman, Terry, whose house we work at. This is the one that has the meditation structure too. She's amazing. We show up every semester and she feeds us, and she cooks all these wonderful things with guava or bananas or like all these traditional Filipino dishes. And the students get to learn that, and the students get to put sustainability into practice and think about what it is to work at someone's home and to be in that space from a community development perspective. And then thinking about what things promote happiness while also promoting sustainability as we do that too. That's Terry again up there, and Terry on the left there too, and just harvesting some of her vegetables. And she always has friends come over, her sister, and they come over and they harvest a bunch of stuff and they'll give it away to the church or these types of things as we do it. And so we're watching this and we're observing and we're asking questions and we're interviewing and we're thinking about, what things can we capture to talk about the impacts of the work that we're doing? How are people growing happier? Do they feel more connected to this idea of sustainability as we go through this process? And we'll have things where students every semester will host a block party. And this is something that came from the residents. They wanted to do this. And this is just one neighborhood that we work in. And in the block party, they wanted to make tie-dye t-shirts. And so we made some t-shirts, and we're just assessing these processes as we go through, thinking about how this type of stuff builds community for both the students and for the residents in the community that live there. And then the last kind of part, we do have the international presence in Guadalajara. We're working with folks there. We are in the process of developing a survey and some interview protocol on getting a baseline idea of what state of happiness and well-being and health and sustainability are out there. And then having some projects led there by the university on the ground and assessing that over time. And we do that stuff in our work in other communities as well. And then in Santa Cruz, Bolivia, Erica, who's there on the right in that top picture, she's from Santa Cruz, Bolivia. And so we're in process of starting some projects there with groups too, doing similar work, happy neighborhood work, and thinking about the framework and the process. And this is the last little part of one of our trips to Mexico. Here on the top right, it was a fun little exercise we did where we set up the room in 4 quadrants, and we gave everyone a concept of happiness. So we talked about one group would be pleasure, one group would be meaning or eudaimonia, and then we had another group that was stress, and then we had another group that was depression, and they all had to act those things out physically in their space, and then we had them start interacting. So the stress group had to take over the happiness group, and the eudaimonia group had to take over the pleasure group, and it was really fun to kind of play with those ideas and those thoughts, and having explored some of the literature, and then seeing how they interact, and then thinking about how that translates into our own life. And then this is the group that we work with to work in community. So when we go into community, we're thinking about what are the places that people derive a sense of meaning from? What are the places that people derive a sense of pleasure? Where do people feel stressed or not safe? And then what are the things that we could do to promote a greater sense of safety if that's what folks are looking for, or a greater sense of purpose, or a spiritual space, or a place for food, or whatever it is that they're doing. So we use these things as guiding lights to help promote the projects that we create. And that is it.
Thank you so much, Scott. That was fascinating. We'll turn this over to everyone. I think we have 8 participants today. So if anyone has any questions for Scott, feel free to either type it into the chat bar or just unmute yourself and we'll go from there. Well, we'll let people either type it in or start, but I have a question for you, Scott.
Sure.
I'm just curious how you find the participants, particularly the resident with the pergola and the garden. How did she find you, or did you find her? What's that process like?
So when we started this work, we were actually asked by big organizations like Habitat for Humanity and these types of groups to create surveys on community well-being and happiness, and we did that, and we helped apply them, and get the data and do a little bit of analysis and stuff. And what I actually found was that in the majority of these places we did this, people felt like it was a violation of their privacy to ask them about their happiness, and they felt like it was a very personal thing. And so we took a bit of a shift there. There were some folks that were in one of those communities we worked in, and Terry was one of them, who wanted to still work together. And so what we did is we flipped it on its head, and now we only work in communities where we're invited by the residents. And so that process was a bit slow at first, and now it's really ramping up, and so we're invited to work in communities. And we have different ways of, some folks we don't conduct surveys or interviews with at all because they're just not into it. And some folks we ask folks if they're up to it, and if they are, then we do that. And if they're not, then we just continue to think about the process of working with communities and working with different people. And we have folks that are, low income, multi-generational family households, spaces. And we also have folks, on the Navajo reservation who are indigenous and have been there for a long time. And we also have folks who are fairly affluent, and they have good jobs, making decent money and things like this. And so we have a whole range of different people we work with. Yeah.
I'll put in my 2 cents in that. I know I've worked in a lot of different communities, and with the work that we've done, we always work with a bridge. So we're not the ones who are doing the surveying. Somebody else is actually collecting the data, and then we might help with them analyzing the data. But I think that piece of the sort of being observed or being the observer is delicate in this, especially in this world where so much data is being misused. We have a question from Joe. Let me scroll up. So is social cohesion, well, let me just preface this. We have 3 questions. So one is from Joe. Is social cohesion in a community context the key to happiness? If so, what are the major drivers of social cohesion?
Yeah, That's a great question. I don't know if I would say it's the key. I mean, I think it's definitely an important aspect. And the drivers, some of the basic primal drivers, just biologically speaking, are a sense of protection, a sense of safety. I mean, safety is one of the things that always comes up in our work. And so having a sense of social cohesion, and you can debate about what the group is cohesive about. It could be that we're cohesive about isolating ourselves and taking all resources and killing everyone else or something, right? But when we see residents start to get a sense of knowing each other again in communities that we've worked, you start to see these amazing exchanges of recipes and knowledge and food. And some of the residents we worked with, they became friends, and they speak totally different languages, and one doesn't speak a lot of English, and the other speaks English fairly well, and they threw a block party. They threw a little party for our group of students through that, and you could just feel the sense of happiness. They were so proud and happy to share the food that we had been helping work to grow with, right? And so it depends on what you're cohesive about, without question, but there's a lot of folks in the work that we do that feel isolated, and social isolation is a new, it's not a new thing, but it is a growing issue. And there are studies that are looking at the associations of social isolation and depression, and the higher rates of depression that we have right now, and opioid use, and all these things. And based on experience and also studies that exist, we start to see that cohesion and connection and social capital are incredibly important for happiness and well-being. I'm not sure if I want to say they're the key, because I don't want to get my head chopped off, but it's important. And all the things that are associated with that. I mean, I could just go on and on about what comes from a community. And so another thing that we do that I didn't mention is we spend time in intentional communities. So we go, I bring my family sometimes, and I go and I'm there looking at how do they set up structures around community. And we were just at one in Quail Springs, north of LA, and it's a community of 30 or 40 people on a big chunk of land, and obviously that's not what we can all do, but they as a community, they will build a house for someone, and then that person will be welcomed in. And when you're welcome in, you have a role and a niche within the community that you serve. So maybe it's administrative, maybe it's food, maybe it's caring for the garden or the animals, maybe it's the natural building. And that has me thinking, I'm processing on this now and reading on it, but it has me thinking about the way we all agree to show up in a neighborhood and not spend any time with each other. And one of the things I want to share too is we were in Guatemala. We had taken a group of students to study abroad. And we were sitting and we were talking with the residents in this village. And the students were asking about how well they know each other in the community. And you could tell they thought it was a strange question, right? Because they know each other out of necessity for survival and taking care of one another and their family, and they've known each other for a long time. And they asked our students how well they know people in their neighborhood, and this sense of shame just watched over the students. You could see it in their faces that they didn't know anybody, but their beautiful reaction was that the folks we were sitting with, their jaws were just wide open, like we had just told them we didn't believe in Jesus, or it was very powerful, and they couldn't believe that we didn't know our neighbors, and that we had no sense of who lived next door to us, or what they did for work, or what their jobs were, or what were their favorite things in life, or what food did they like. It was just so mind-boggling for them. And this all connects back to this idea of social cohesion. We've lost our connection to community, and there's a lot of things that have made their way into creating that separation, and it's the way that we work. It's the way that we agree to be in relationship with our families, be in relationship with our jobs. And these are things that I'm really interested in exploring. And it all ties back to happiness, of course, right?
Yeah. So we're winding up here. We have three more, two questions and one request. So the request is to get more information and materials about regenerative development. So if you could, you could send that to Jill, then she can send it out to the people who are on this call. They could have the access to that. And so then we just have one more question, that I think we partly answered at least. Mute that. All right. So one is, can you point to any hoods that you would call happy hoods, which I think you kind of went over just now in terms of social cohesion versus isolation, if there are other features that you wanted to hit on that. But the other question that, if you could answer this and then we'll wrap up, is in your community development projects, how do you interact with local governments?
Mm-hmm.
So if you wanted to give us a little few
I can
points
tackle
on
those.
that,
Sure.
we'll wrap up. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Laura. You can check out Regenesis. I'll share that later for regenerative development. They're a great group doing a bunch of work with that. And then I'll first say about this working with cities. We do work with cities, and we see ourselves as a representative for communities, and we are a bridge that Laura talked about, between bridge and translators between city desires and resident desires, and how do you work on that. We also do work on the campus in the same way, where the population of a building would like to see some changes, and you have, you know, politicians or administrators, so to speak, that want things to be a certain way across the whole university, and then we work as a bridge like that. So we're always bridging ourselves in between and getting involved in politics and things like that too. What was the middle question, Laura?
Oh, do you have any, like you already talked about the attributes of a happy neighborhood, but were there other attributes of a happy neighborhood that you'd like to point out?
Yeah, I mean, I just think it all boils down to connection, and it boils down to connection with ourselves, connections with one another, connections with the systems that we rely on, like food and water, and appreciation for these things. It's at a very basic level. That's what it's about. And the happiness that we have seen derived from that connection is, it's visceral. You know, there's these, the last thing I'll say about this, there's amazing studies on bacteria in soil, and Mbeke is one of them, and I forget the other one off the top of my head, but there's been studies that have shown that just from putting your hands in soil and inhaling soil in the air, you become happier. And you get these releases of dopamine and things like that, right? And so one thing we do is we make a big mud pit, and we let students stick their hands in, and they just turn into like these happy little children. You can see it, and they'll fight it. They'll stand there and they're like, I don't want to put, and I'll be like, get your hands in there, like get your hands in, and they put it in, and they become, they feel what it is to be happy, right? And that's just an introduction to it, and we're working toward using that sense of happiness at a start, which is biological and pleasure and these types of things, and moving into a space where it's about growth along a path toward meaning and fulfilling your purpose and finding your space in the work that we're doing, where you feel like you're living a meaningful and purposeful life. And in all the communities we worked in, there's happiness in every community, every single one we've worked in, and we learn from each. And but there's also sadness and depression, and that's beautiful too. And so how do we work in those spaces? There's no one answer to a happy life, but there's a whole lot of answers to it, for sure.
Jill, did you have anything else?
I just have one final question, Scott. Is these programs, are they only open to students to participate in, or do you have local volunteers, community members?
Yeah, we definitely have community members that get involved. We have random folks just show up and start working and helping, or like Sprouts donated, which is a grocery store here, donated a little money, and now their employees come and work with us. And
that's great.
Yeah, it's open to anyone and everyone, and it's from such a humble approach. I mean, we're still learning and growing and drawing on theories that exist, and we know there's a lot of work to do to continue to develop these things. And again, just coming back to all of it, science in itself is a part of the game, and it has a role to play in this. And as it evolves and as it draws on practices that have existed for a long time, we start to see that it's all a pathway toward a happy and sustainable future.